Hello, I am Madam Onça. I am the creator of the World Spirit Tarot, and I am your hostess for today's Tarot 1 Fundamentals session. This is the last in a 4-week series, and I'll be taking a few weeks off after this. I'm an entertainer, event producer, and community organizer living here in Richmond, Virginia. We've had a lot going on at this moment in history here in this community. Hence, I could use a quick sabbatical. I'm an entertainer, an event producer, and a community organizer here, and I have many more sessions already recorded for you, for those that find this during the break, right on my YouTube channel. You are welcome to enjoy them at your leisure. That should be under Madam Onça on the YouTubes. Again, my classes are currently all level and by donation, and I've been offering them continuously through the quarantine in an attempt to do what I can in the world. Given that we're in a time of intense social change and also for many people, fiscal uncertainty. You are welcome to donate at Venmo at World Spirit Tarot or via PayPal at world.spirit.tarot@gmail.com. If you aren't already familiar with me, you can learn more about my work at the snazzy new website that we have underway, which is theworldspirittarot.com. Today, we will be walking through the major cards. The second session tonight will be about the role of animals in the symbolism of the tarot. Get yourself situated, and if you have a tarot deck with you of any kind, you may want to wish to separate out your major cards for use in this session, and then we'll be walking through the minors in the second session for folks who are planning to stay. As always, if you have any questions or other comments to make, by all means, feel free to drop them in the chat. I appreciate you all so much for being here tonight. I am excited to be here, excited to share the material, and I'm excited to take a 2-week hiatus after this and recharge my batteries. So as you know, tarot has 2 different sets of cards within that 78 card traditional deck. Generally, we call them the minor arcana or the major arcana. The major arcana speak to the big arcs in our lives, you know, sort of the big lessons, the movie trailer, as it were. And the minors tend to be more about the day-to-day workings of the cards. Today, we're going to move rather quickly through the major cards because, of course, we could spend a whole month of classes just doing them. And instead, we have just today's, 50 minutes with over 20 cards to do. So that being said, I will move quickly, but as always, I welcome your input. I know y'all are prone to have great questions and great additional points to make. So feel free to chime in the ye old chat. Now these cards, they are sometimes presented as depicting the fool's journey. In other words, if you were to lay the major cards out, wait, yes, if you were to, oh, you know what, I think I'm gonna pin myself here. Boop. How about now? There we go. Great. The major cards are sometimes presented as depicting the fool's journey. If you were to lay them out, from 0 all the way through, can be construed as like the life and learning cycle of any individual on the path to becoming well-rounded, experienced, an empowered person. That is one really great way to learn the story of them. It's certainly not the only way, but you may hear that phrase, the fool's journey, come up over and over. It is important to note that the number of major cards in a deck, as well as their names, their sequence, the symbolism, and all the sort of trappings of fashion, architecture, and the subculture will change from deck to deck, and they've certainly shifted many times over the centuries. So as we walk through things, if you have a slightly different style of deck, you may see slightly different symbolism or even different sequencing. Make a note of that for sure, but just know that there are as many exceptions as rules in the tarot. Okay, so I encourage you now to grab your Fool. If you need a minute, consider getting your cards in order if you can. If you have a deck that is not numbered, of course, that becomes a little more challenging. Suffice it to say that the next things that you're going to need are the Fool, the Magician, the Priestess, the Emperor, Empress, and Hierophant. That's a good place to start. So we're going to start rolling right now with the Fool. Typically, this is some lighthearted individual, typically in tatters, sort of derelict, as it were, sort of rags of glory, stepping blithely off of some sort of precipice, and they are typically accompanied by animals, sometimes a dog. I've even seen an alligator in one of the decks. This card generally describes an uncharted phase in your life beginning. It's time to dare to do something new, to live fully in the present. It's an auspicious time to make that literal or metaphorical leap of faith. As you see, this person appears to be making what we might assume is a bad choice, and yet the universe is inclined to support you or the querent during the time when the Fool card comes up. So you can courageously flout convention as you pursue your dreams. Be smart, make a fresh start with optimism in your heart. And as a book that I really enjoy, and the subject of the tarot is the Mythic Tarot, and the author Juliet Sharman Burke said, to not begin is to deny the gods. So this card really encourages you to make that step. There's the Fool. Now we're going to jump again at speed because there's a lot of cards and a little time to the Magician. This card has changed from my deck in the previous edition, and of course will look different in whatever edition, whatever version of the tarot you have right now. This is typically listed as the card number 1. And the Magician historically also used to be known as the Juggler or the Jongleur. So this is one that has sort of a wandering name over the centuries. This describes pairing intellect with innovation. When it comes up, it says you have all the tools you need to take action. They are symbolized. That sort of level of mastery is symbolized by the representations of all of the suits. You've got swords and wands and pentacles and cups. Everything about them is sort of in motion, and they appear to be very at ease as they make it happen. This card also bodes well for your undertakings. It's some livable mix of spiritual strength and worldly power. It's worth leaning into your own latent abilities, figure out what you know that you don't even know you know as you develop a deeper awareness of yourself. This card definitely talks about communication skills and learning to use them. Please remember with the Magician that truly clever people are able to accept good advice. So there's the Magician card. When he comes up, he usually says, you've got all the tools you need. You just need the courage to pursue it. Then we come to the High Priestess. Now, in some decks in the old days, she was also known as the Lady Pope, and there's a whole story there I'd be happy to share on another occasion. But the Priestess is typically, there is a lone female identified figure between two pillars, or in this case, trees. My teacher used to say, she is the veil between the worlds. She embodies everything that is sort of most mystical in our psyches. She's wisdom, insight, dreams, psychic abilities, remote viewing. She counsels you to listen deeply to spirit. So when she comes up, it's not about turning away from the world, but it is definitely about keeping your eyes upon the doors of your inner temple. So when she comes up for you in a reading, it is about making intuition your ally and being aware that there may be forces at work in a situation that you cannot see, some secret motives. So yes, for me, in making this, I wanted to take her out of the temples of men and put her into the temple of nature. But typically she's indoors between some pillars with pomegranates upon it. Now that brings us to the Empress, who, if the High Priestess is very much about sort of the cold vastness of space, you might say, then the Empress is about the warmth of the earth. She is very much like the Gaia. She's the great provider. She is the steward of everything creative and sustaining. I think of her as very much a card of like, life-affirming decadence. Like, eat the tiramisu, get your feet rubbed, lie around in the sun with the cat. She really speaks to leaning into the comforts of life and not just the rigors that we are encouraged to. Her personal magnetism and generosity are comforting. So sometimes when she comes up, you will experience that you are her, that you need to be her, or that you are blessed to have your life touched by her. Again, she's sort of luxurious, and she enjoys everything about the world that is, fertile and decadent and proliferating and chaotic in a fun way. She says, take pleasure in your body, and in doing so, also honor the earth. Make time for comfort, decadence, connection. Everything about her is sort of juicy and voluptuous. I very much felt, again, that the Empress really would benefit from being taken off a cold stone throne and laid out in the world of the sun. Now we come to the Emperor. This card often is, there's a picture of an emperor sitting very stony-faced on a throne, staring directly at you, at the viewer. In my case, I opted to have him looking out over the big picture. I really wanted that notion of the emperor as not individually confrontational, but rather someone who has the broad view. The emperor at its best is infrastructure. It is, roads that work. It is free libraries. It is, 911 that helps you when you need it. At its worst, it is everything we are starting to see right now. It is dogmatism. It is the surveillance state. It is fascism. So he's also father issues. It can be everything that sort of the notion of fatherhood means to you for best or for ill. So infrastructure brings order to chaos. Here's the best and worst of everything that civilization has to offer: protection and oppression, dogma and despotism. When this card comes up, it encourages you to consider your relationship to laws, ethics, privilege, individuality, and authority. And of course, that notion of privilege is particularly relevant for us in the modern moment as we're having that cultural conversation. It's also about, again, sort of familial authority and where you derive your sense of autonomy and power. Dominion over the self is necessary. Dominion over others is not, as my co-author Jessica Godino says. So I can tell you I had a hard time making this card. It took me a long time because of my own particular issues with my dad. And I really had to work to find what was best in the emperor. He has plenty to commend him. Again, it's why we have the internet, so that we can be having this conversation right now. Now we're going to go, our next cards will be the Hierophant, the Lovers, and the Chariot. Let's go there. So the Hierophant, basically, this is a word that means pope. It's a spiritual leader in an organized sort of sense. So you very much see the seated figure. And while the emperor is supposed to be representational, very much of sort of mundane authority, this is a card of sort of a higher authority, if you want to think of it that way. So when it comes up, a lot of times it's the card of like, are you going to graduate school? Are you going for the promotion? Are you going for the degree? It's about digging into hierarchical systems in order to learn and accomplish more, literally bowing at the feet of authority to get that done. So it comes up to say, are you ready to expand your knowledge? It's bringing together the worlds of inner spirit and outer learning. This card represents laws and culture of both religious and academic tradition, which, as we know, if you go back far enough, the modern academia is really modeled on old monastic models anyway. So this card says, study the collected wisdom of ancestors in the academic sense, with all its gifts and shortcomings, and then find the truly sacred in your own way. Of course, as a bit of a non-dogmatic person, this is the part where I say, do the work, find out what works for you, and then throw the rest of it out. So now our Fool has met essentially the mother figure, the father figure, spiritual guidance, mundane guidance, and then we come to the Lovers. The Lovers, also back in the day, used to be known as the twins. So it's not strictly a card of romance. It can also be a card of just finding balance. The Lovers. It speaks to partnership, union, balance. It can be really about, it can be, again, blooming romance and deepening of connection, or it can really be about sort of making a livable alchemy in yourself. Trust the connection that you feel, reach out, strive to give of yourself without losing yourself. This is not a card that encourages codependence. Self-acceptance and self-knowledge are essential to a balanced connection with others. Like, there has to be somebody in you in order to meet anyone else where they are. When this card comes up, it does sometimes speak to a blossoming adventure. And typically this card has red roses and white lilies for sort of passion and purity, respectively. I added the notion of sort of Pan and Kuan Yin to represent passion and compassion as being essential to a balanced relationship. That's sort of both the domestic and the carnal, I guess you might say. So there's our Lovers card. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them down in the chat. I know I'm talking fast, but here we go. Speaking of fast, it is the Chariot. My teacher used to say, all dressed up and nowhere to go. I think of this in readings a lot of times as you are sitting in the driveway, fully dressed, but you've got your foot on the brake and your foot on the gas. So it's all about sort of revving and trying to get clarity of direction as you get ready to release these sort of powerful juggernaut that you are out into the world. So employ self-discipline to create the right conditions for success. As my child would say, you have a lot going on. So outer fortitude, paired with self-awareness is going to be your winning combination here, collecting yourself for action. The Chariot is just waiting for you to have a focused hand on the reins so that you can charge off to your next adventure. Sometimes the tarot will make a pun with this card, and it literally, it'll be about needing to leave on a trip, or something to that effect. So sometimes it's very literally talking about travel and journey, although often it's speaking in broader sort of metaphorical terms. Now we're going to go from the Chariot to Strength and the Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune. Fantastic. Okay, so Strength. This card, if you look back in some of the old traditional decks, you will see Heracles prying open the mouth of the lion. At some point, it turns into a woman who appears to be looking into the mouth of a lion. And then I think as our dominant paradigm has shifted, at least in the alternative thinking set, away from as much of a power over model and more into a power of co-arising model, we see that strength, also sometimes known as lust, that it's very much about a woman, sort of déshabillée. She is usually naked, vulnerable, and fearless, accompanied by a lion. This card has associations with Leo, also, by the way. Again, astrological aspects of the cards is not my strong suit. It's very much a piece in process, but Leo's not hard to pick up here. So when the Strength card comes up, it's usually talking about a power from within rather than lording power over others. Harnessing your own instinctive nature, which I feel is why she is sort of cuddled up with this lion, and taming the inner beast, not worried about pesky self-doubts. And the little mouse says, great power in small things. Sometimes it's about, it's about the little things. So endurance, perseverance, passion, and commitment take this towards victory. And there's a whole other conversation that can be had here about the snake and the flames and the lemniscate, that figure 8, but suffice it to say they all serve to connect her with this notion of sort of primal, I want to say primal femininity, but maybe it's just primal humanity in motion. So there's the Strength card. Oops, there's the Strength card. And now the Hermit. There we go. Your Hermit is probably something like a cloaked figure, moving along a mountain's edge, holding a lantern, something to that effect. As is this. I wanted my Hermit to be a little more gender ambiguous. So this card, as the Hierophant says, go study your spiritual business in the hallowed halls. This one says turn to the inner realm. Turn away from ordinary things for a time and seek the voice of the divine within you. Perhaps you can work with a guide or a mentor, sort of one-on-one. Perhaps you go totally solo. Who knows? Perhaps there's an app for that. But in blazing your own path, the Hermit encourages you to not only find your own way, but in doing so, possibly be a role model and a guide for others in the future. And in this time, a lot of people are getting the Hermit because it's just saying, yeah, guess what? Everybody's trapped at home. Again, sometimes the cards like to be a little cheeky and just go with stating the obvious. Now, here we have the Wheel of Fortune. This is number 10 in most decks. And interestingly, it is the only card in the deck, only of the majors, that is, while Donna Fortuna, Lady Luck, is as an entity, she's sort of a saint, as it were, or divine personage, but the Wheel of Fortune itself is a mechanism. It's actually the only sort of exalted device in the whole deck, which I find fascinating, because it could have been called Donna Fortuna, but it's really not. It's the thing. It's like the hourglass. So the Wheel of Fortune usually says big things are shifting, unknown factors are at work in your situation, challenge and victory ride right on each other's heels. So you may find yourself being like, if things were just really awful for you, you're probably about to turn a corner. And likewise, remember that everything is cyclical. Lives and empires rise and fall. Pandemics come and go. Cultural norms change. So be poised to take action when the wheel swings you around. Symbolically speaking, I like this notion of the wheel having people, the same person at different phases of life. You see the child, you see the woman, you see the in her crone phase, sort of swimming around through the sea of time. And here we see the forces of not just the wheat and the Patronus, as it were, but something speaking to different phases of humanity's journey as societies have risen and fallen, both agrarian and agricultural, hunter-gatherer, and of course, now we're moving through the industrial. So the Wheel of Fortune rises and falls. I think of it almost like the Magic 8 Ball. Ask again later. Okay, now we're going to jump to Justice and the Hanged Man. And if I'm not mistaken, the next card, lo, it shall be death. So Justice. This is one of the cards I find the trickiest. When it's not 100% literal in a reading, sometimes I find it challenging to otherwise read. Sometimes it literally means if you have been having difficulty with a legal matter, it will be resolved. I had that come up with someone who had been struggling for years to get their green card, and boom, it suddenly worked out. Or, you know, your child custody suit finally, you know, goes in front of the judge and gets worked out. So when it comes up, it means speedy resolution of a lingering legal or ethical matter. However, other than that, sometimes it means that you yourself are being judged or called upon to make a big decision in your life. You know, justice is blind. So the question that it brings up for me sometimes is the difference between doing what is legal and doing what is right and making a determination about what you're comfortable with there. So think on the rules that apply to you. Is it the golden rule? Is it Wheaton's law? Like, what do you want to live by? Just be honest with yourself, as all falsehoods and denials are outed in time. So Justice is sometimes known as one of the virtues cards, where the fool runs into this notion of virtue as he moves away from childish things and becomes a person who has to cope with abstract concepts such as justice. And now here we have the Hanged Man. Of course, as you all doubtless know, the Hanged Man is the dying and reborn god, which is a recurring theme, and so many cultures have an iteration of that. You know, whether it is Osiris, whether it is Odin, whether it is Jesus. Here we see hanging from the tree in the middle of a vision quest, as it were, to discover the runic language. The hangman, literally, when it comes up, it is describing you being in suspension, kind of held up, unable to take action because of circumstances. So say we all. But it is also, and more particularly, a card of committed action. It is a card of meaningful self-sacrifice. So when it comes up, you may need to give till it hurts. It's about digging down deep into your reserves of time, resources, creativity to get to the other side of something. I think of this as very much a card of meaningful sacrifice. So it is, you know, again, going to grad school and knowing you're going to be living on ramen for 2 years, but it's because you are moving towards that very important degree. It is, you know, it is what we're all doing right now, as like trying to minimize our effects, our impact, and our travels in the world for the greater good. So at its best, it is sacrifice to a great purpose, hence the dying and reborn god. At its worst, it is codependency and sort of wasted martyrdom. So resist codependency, any kind of habitual tendency to throw yourself under the bus to earn some kind of approval. You want to make sure that when you're living the hanged man, you are making it as meaningful and as enjoyable as you can. It's not a bad card. It just usually suggests making some strong choices to live by. Speaking of living, now here's the death card. This is usually the 13th card in the deck. Mine is different from some others. The Rider-Waite family tends to be focused on the Grim Reaper, you know, the sort of skeleton and the scythe. And those images typically have young, old, religious figures, secular authority, all sort of being felled by the scythe of the Grim Reaper. And it means the same thing, but I wanted something that had a little bit more affirming imagery to it. So because when the death card comes up, it is rarely a card of physical death. The tarot's not going to be big on predicting that for you. Usually when this comes up, it is something more of like an immediate and dramatic transformation in your life, something near and dear to you that bitterly needed to go, like a toxic relationship, outmoded perspectives, dangerous work environment. Something in your life may be imploding, and your path through that loss may include some of the phases these folks are going through: anger, denial, depression, any of those things. But eventually, acceptance and transformation. Phoenix-like, your fresh future awaits on the other side of this sometimes very painful transformation. I love the death card. And incidentally, in my case, that is actually a picture of one of my high school friends who was murdered in one of America's first, school, like campus shootings. His father wrote an excellent book about it and about the state of gun laws in America. If you're interested in that sort of thing, it is called Gone Boy. And it is very much a picture of this young person, because that was my first real brush with the understanding that, cute neighborhoods and private schools do not protect you from things like that. That death is going to happen for everybody. Now, speaking of cheer, let's go to Temperance, the Devil, and the Tower. And we're actually making good time, so let me know, again, if you have any questions. The Temperance card, the Temperance Angel, this card is sometimes called art. It is very much a card of alchemy. It is about trying to find the livable blend. It's a great card. When the Temperance card comes up, it suggests, well, there's the sort of the taste forward meaning is temperance. Literally, it is moderation. Whatever you've been doing too much of, consider reining that back and trying to find some moderation or some equilibrium. Look for good advice. Seek to make a livable compromise. Step back from drama. This is very much the card of personal alchemy. So consider this a call for you to work to create your best possible self. Evaluate, own, release any kind of feelings that disrupt your harmony, your healing, your higher learning. And if you're meditation inclined, I encourage you to do like a guided meditation into this card. You will understand the nature of the Temperance Angel so much more once you have interacted with it. So I thought of it once, that notion of compromise. How much can you compromise? How much can you walk back from an ultimatum? How much can you compromise before you yourself are compromised? Now, speaking of ultimatums, here we have the Devil. This card typically shows two figures sort of shackled to the base of a pillar, or like a plinth with Baphomet or some sort of dreadful horned god on it. And I wanted to make it a little bit more seductive in the sense that this card speaks very much to addiction, obsession, and overdoing it. And very few people run headlong towards addiction consciously. Usually it's something that kind of sneaks up on you a little bit at a time. So when this card comes up, it speaks to life out of balance, addiction, obsession, OCD, self-destructive behavior. Maybe it's just something more subtle. It's about life out of balance, denial of the facts, and relentless pursuit of gratification at the expense of your whole life and everyone in it. So it's unsustainable and endangers everybody. When this card comes up, sometimes it's, maybe you need to get out and, have a little bit more wildness on a Saturday night. Generally, this card comes up as a cautionary note about something in your life that you are in denial about. And the only time I've ever had a tarot reading with somebody where they went, nope, I have no idea, this is all crap, I don't believe it, I want my money back, it was they got this card. And I was like, oh, that's what denial looks like in motion. Of course, I gave them their money and sent them on their way. So when this card comes up, it asks you, whatever you're doing too much of, be it work, be it altruism, be it drugs, whatever you're doing, is it worth it? And speaking of too much, now we come to the Tower. This is, one might say, the patron card of what's happening for us now. This is also known historically as the lightning struck tower, and you can see the lightning is knocking the folks from their high vantage point and taking them down towards the earth. This card comes up typically to describe a radical change of perspective and the sometimes welcome, often unwelcome realization of the true shape of things in your life. So it's about that radical shift as you realize you're not positioned on the landscape where you thought you were. Healing and calm will come to you eventually, but in the moment, this usually feels like catastrophic bad events, bad timing. You might say it is the unwanted blessing of radical change. So reversals of fortune can come up through this, and they can bring hardship, but they do also unmask the denial and overwhelm that was spoken of in the previous card. So they can challenge rigidity. As my friend and co-author Jessica said, the way down from the tarot is just full of surprises. And the writer who I speak of often, Byron Ballard, she has a book called Earthworks, Rituals for the Tower Times, something like that. She has a beautifully written manifesto in there that describes us living in the Tower Times now, the time of radical change as we sort of reposition our understanding of ourselves on the earth and in the world. Hashtag Tower Times. So I highly recommend her Tower Times manifesto as your homework if you ever expect to look at the Tower card again. Now we're going to come to the moon. Now let's do this. So it's actually going to be the star, the moon, and the sun. This is the celestial bodies segment of the Fool's Journey. So the star, again, I'm actually remaking this card for the 3rd edition of my deck that will come out. I really love the colors in this card, but my feelings about how I want to represent it have shifted. So typically it is an unclad woman sort of kneeling by the water side, pouring liquid onto the earth and into the water. And she is usually, there's an ibis representative of the god Thoth in the picture. So I want to get a little bit more Thoth in here, but we do still see a bird carrying divine messages, as it were. And you may have guessed that this card has associations with Aquarius, if that means anything to you. So this is the sort of ultimate card of healing and calm after strife. It's a card of inspiration, insight, optimism, and a renewal of the capacity to have empathy for others. This card speaks to being revitalized and reminded that love and creativity are not finite, that they are infinite. Your time may not be infinite, but your love and inspiration may be. The more you choose to give, the more you may choose to receive. So this card, basically, when it comes up, it says, all that stuff you went through, you're going to be fine. You're going to recover nicely. Then we come to the moon, which is this card. Symbolically, this is a neat card in that there are no hominid figures in it. We see the towers. Sometimes they are human-made towers. Sometimes they are natural towers, as in this. We see the sort of divine spark, cosmic mojo coming down from the moon. There are typically 2 animals here, often like a wolf and a dog. There's a lot of discussion about why that is. I think of it as being very much, this is sort of our wildest nature with its instincts coming to bear, and this is our wildness made fit for society, also bringing its wisdom. So it's sort of ourselves in both aspects. And then there's always some kind of like fish, crustacean, something coming up from the water, and that represents messages from the subconscious. So this card used to, I think, have more connotations of like the unknown and dread in the, sort of witchy occult revival that we're in. Everybody goes, oh, it's the moon. We like the moon. She's our favorite satellite. But it does have a sort of dual message. One says dreams and daydreams that are bringing you messages from your deep mind that you really need to pay attention to that information. Intuition and introspection have the answers that you need in your current situation. So listen to them. Sometimes you'll be inspired. Sometimes you'll be frightened by the things that you, the information that you receive during this time. Just, make sure you pay attention to those things. The thing about the moon is that it describes metaphorically as if you were walking over a moonlit landscape. You can see the outline of things, but you cannot see the specifics. The great danger of walking in the moonlight is, you may misgauge distance. You may step in a pothole and so forth. So there's a notion here that you may be able to see a lot of things very clearly with your sort of intuitive self, but know that you are moving through an uncertain landscape. So the moon does speak of the things that cannot yet be known. And now we are almost, we're winding down towards our last handful of cards. The Sun is usually number 19. This one is also redone from my previous deck, and I'm ever so much happier with this one because making unicorns was awesome. It's everything you like about horses, except for with more glitter. This is one of those cards that's also pretty easy to read when it comes up. So here's the thing. People sometimes are fixated on the major cards as like the real tarot cards. That's fine. But often they're easier to read than the minors because they are speaking in, they're almost like the emojis, if you'll forgive the modern reference. Like the Sun card, it's pretty straightforward. It is celebration, it is joy, it is festivity after surviving all that fuss and bother that we just went through, what with the, you know, the tower and the devil and the moon and all of these things. This is like the ultimate card of benediction. So when it comes up, it says you get to release all your old habits of guardedness. You get to explore the sort of earthly joys and healthy pleasures that are available to you at this time. It is definitely, you know, about making the most of things. It's a card that says you did it. Gold star. In this case, the star is the Sun. Now we're going to come to, this brings us to the last two. And then that will give us probably 10 minutes to explore any questions you have about reading them in context or anything else about them. We're going to look at Judgment, and we're going to look at the World. The Judgment card in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, this is typically, and its clones, its iterations, this is typically an archangel blowing the trumpet, gray-skinned figures rising out of sarcophagi. It's rather gloomy looking and zombie-tastic, if you like that sort of thing. It is, however, in spite of this sort of cinema noir quality about it, you might say, it does have some real positive aspects. This is one of those places where spending some time with traditional tarot meanings and history is helpful, because you may have been taxed to guess that without having read up on it. I mean, unless you have a lot of really positive associations with zombies. Anyway, so when the Judgment card comes up, it typically is describing, at its best, it is resurrection, renewal. It is really an opportunity to kind of reboot, as it were. Because there's some sort of big decision that you need to reckon with or resolve some matters of the past. It's very much about setting aside what was and coming to grips with it and moving forward into what shall be. It's acknowledging the consequences of your previous actions, making amends where you can, and accepting what you cannot. Questions that come up may include, like, what is your vocation? Why are you here? How can you make amends for the things that you have done? If tomorrow was your day to go, what would your eulogy say? What kind of person are you? So we see in my iteration of this card, I wanted to move away from the zombie-tastic expression. And here we see the same thing. It's the weighing of souls. Here we are being measured against the weight of the feather of truth to determine, you know, sort of how this person lived their lives. And we see all of these folks here. Perhaps they're migrating. They've got their bundles and their carts. They are in the transition, journeying from one phase of life to another. So when the Judgment card comes up, it's making a change from who you were to who you will be. Let me just check right there. Okay, good. And now that brings us to the final card. Typically, this is going to be 21, and it is known variously as the world, the universe, the multiverse, or even the eon. And it is often a dancing figure surrounded by the critters that represent both the evangelists in the Christian traditions and in this case also the four elements: earth, air, fire, water. I've been watching Avatar, so when I say that, that's what I'm hearing in my mind. Earth. So the universe, as I like to think of her, this card very much is about dancing your truth. It's about the victory dance. This suggests that you are completing a cycle of growth, that you are completing a cycle of learning, of adventure, It's almost like the hope of wholeness and mastery that was suggested in the Magician has been accomplished here, and you can sort of see that in a similar sporty, jaunty posture. It's a card of victory and fulfillment. Again, the resolution of old issues. One thing ends, and then it's really about almost stepping off. Like, okay, great, I learned everything that I needed to know about that, and now I can start all over again with the open eyes, the bright hopes, and the naivete of the fool, going from that very first card all the way through its long, exciting, challenging, energizing, enervating journey all the way here to the fullness that is the universe card. And then right after this, there will be another fool, as you said. Well, I've learned all that. It's time for me to step off and learn a whole nother cycle of adventure. So it's a very positive card. Now, again, all tarot cards can be interpreted by their historical meanings, the symbolism in the card itself, and your own associations. For example, you know, the black cat in the Queen of Wands may mean something very different to you if you are, you know, terrified of cats, or if you used to have a black cat named Snuffles when you were a kid, than it did to the person who made that card. The associations that you have with the images and the majors are totally relevant and totally part of your of the evolution of your personal canon of meaning. Okay, so any questions at this point? We have gotten through the cards in an amazing pace. Sometimes that takes hours. What else can I tell you about working with the majors? There are some spreads and even some reading practices where you just use the major cards. I don't tend to do that because I really appreciate the nuances that the minor cards offer, but you can just separate out the majors and say, you know, all right, majors, I got questions. And for example, it might be good for like a reading for the year. There's 21 cards and you've got, you know, if you're trying to get a reading for the quarters of the year, like tell me about my spring, tell me about my summer, and be able to just pull some major cards. That's totally viable. And that does open up some interesting possibilities for you, because some artists and writers are super jazzed about the idea of working with the tarot, and they realize that they don't really want to do the work of making 79 cards, which is what it takes to make a tarot deck. So a lot of times you can get some really beautiful sort of artisanal decks that are just the major cards. Again, I wouldn't use them for day-to-day things, you know, like deciding whether or not to go to the, you know, Christmas party or whatever, because you can only get answered in these very large, bold strokes. But if you've got some big life questions or big life cycles, long arc cycles, working with a majors only deck could totally be a useful option for you. It's great for you in getting used to these cards and knowing them. There's 21, and if you lay them out in 3 rows of 7 and spend some time just really observing everything from the way the horizon lines meet to the directions that the various cards are looking, the moods as they shift. Again, if you imagine it almost as a piece of theater or a film, and observe how the quality sort of shifts from frame to frame, spending time with it outside the divinatory context. That's really what I'm getting at. Spending some time with the cards as raw symbolism. And I've been very taken lately with this notion that I'm going to look into more, with the notion of the tarot log. And I don't mean like log as in book that you write in, but rather TAROLOGUE, which, what is her name? Camellia Elias, maybe, I believe, is the one who taught me that word. And this is the quality of tarot reading that transcends or even just moves differently than what we're doing. What I'm teaching you right now is a mixture between historical reading, which is to say, we can see over centuries, over decades even, where this raw notion of the card, any given card, let's say the devil card, its meaning has obviously shifted in the last 600 years from sort of the popular imaginings of it then to now. We may have a little more sympathy for the devil card these days. We can see how the meanings have shifted historically as our understanding of nature, science, religion, humanity, etc., All these things have accreted like barnacles to the bottom of the boat that is this tarot card, and it has affected how it moves through the psychic water, if you want to think of it that way. The tarolog is somebody who sets all of the historical information that I'm sharing with you, sets aside all of the anecdotal sort of information that I'm also sharing about how, how I have experienced reading, teaching, sharing the cards. And that person, the tarolog, just lays the cards down and is attempting to get pure information. That is the one who sets aside what the cards are about and says, clearly, this figure is looking past this figure at the thing that is sneaking up on them. It's as if they've never seen tarot cards before, and they're interpreting them as if they had come on a wall of painted petroglyphs. So it's a whole other way of sort of calibrating your brain to look at the cards. And the tarot does respond really well to, I don't want to say literal interpretations, because given that they're pieces of paper, that seems like a misnomer. But it does, the tarot does love to lean into some really obvious and really punny interpretations sometimes. So don't miss those. Again, for example, it's like sometimes the Chariot it could be all of these things. It literally can just be the card saying, put down the deck, go get in your car, and go drive and do the thing. Right? So the cards very much, they like being cheeky. And you will notice as you work with the cards, according to whatever force, whatever mechanism it is that you believe makes the cards do their job, be it, your subconscious or your guardian angel or the flying spaghetti monster, whoever makes your cards work for you. The cards, you may notice, if you keep pulling cards for the same questions, you're like, I didn't really get that answer. I didn't really like that answer. How did so-and-so really feel about me? If you keep pulling cards over and over, you will eventually realize the cards are sort of yelling at you. The cards will use more and more of these kind of blunt, punny jokes almost to try to rattle your cage. If you won't take subtle advice, the cards will just start yelling. That's the best way I can describe it. That's one of the first things I realized about cards, although those 20 years ago when I started working at it. All right. Well, that was a very fast walk through the majors. Again, if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to share them with me. And I'm always happy at any time. I'm happy to try to drop what I'm doing and give you what you need. And again, as always, I thank you. I'm Madam Onça. It's been my pleasure to do some kitchen witchy tarot here with you. And I look forward to seeing you either in the next class or down the tarot road. Blessed be.